We used to put everything on SVOD. In 2014 with Netflix, we thought, SVOD is the way. There's no other way, right? You fast forward to today, and 10 years later, you have, TV and fast, and so a linear experience coming back. Who would have thought?
You can find this podcast on simplestream.com, as well as on your favourite platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. If you enjoyed the show, follow us, leave a review, join the conversation, and leave a comment on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can find Simplestream and Beyond the Stream there too. Hello and welcome to Beyond the Stream. Today we have with us an expert in the industry, 18 years of experience with time at Roku and Orange. We have Marion Ranchet. She is the managing director and founder of the Local Act Consultancy. Hi, Marion. How are you doing today?
Hi, Edward. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
I want to pose a big question to you first of all, Marion, which is, how did you get to where you are today?
Let's go down memory lane. No, but in a nutshell, I would say a passion for content from my early age, essentially, which was yesterday, and the envy to have very much of an international career. So you mentioned Orange, strong French and European player, Roku, big international company. But what brought me to launching my own business, I would have to say, dark times brought me there. And that's sometimes, how life is. I think I struggled during the pandemic, and I was looking for, more than what I had at the time. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it myself. And that's what I started 2 years ago. And it's been amazing. It brought me to be with you guys today. So love it.
Excellent.
Every minute of it.
On to the industry today then, Marion. Obviously, your role at the Local Act Consultancy encompasses the European market and how businesses can enter streaming there, essentially. So, the pace of change today is insanely difficult for individuals, talking about just consumers. Like, things change day to day, week to week, and we have different services, and there's a lot of things that now you have to pay for and a lot of things that are free. So how do you think that businesses, let alone individuals, can keep up with that? Because I think we do have a tendency to overcomplicate things in this industry, and it can come down to a simple question, which is who's watching and how.
Well, I'd love to simplify things, and one might argue that you could say that older people are mostly watching television. Us in the middle. I don't exactly how old you are, but let's put me and you in the same bucket, where dipping in and out of TV, SVOD, social media, etc. And younger generation are very much on YouTube. So, but that's very, very high level, and unfortunately, life is more complicated than that. I was actually reading a study last week where within Gen Z, they saw a difference between Gen Z male and Gen Z female. They were looking at, how they were politically inclined, women more towards, the left, and men the right, a very different vision of society, etc. So for any company that is consumer facing, it's not even just a question of generation anymore. It can also be, gender based, right? So it is an incredibly fragmented market. And so how complicated for a company to have a strategy that will, essentially tap into all of those buckets of consumers. I don't think I have the answer, right? So it's really much an iteration.
It's really difficult, don't get me wrong. It was a big question. What I'd like to get down to is at an individual level. Say, for instance, now we're both going to finish our days today. When you get home, what do you do? How do you watch?
Okay, so on Fridays here at the Ranchet family, we do movie nights every Friday, and movie night is in front of the TV. So yeah, I'll get comfortable. Now the question is, what will we watch and with which device? So in some cases, I'm using my phone and, I'm casting to my TV if I can't find what I want on some of the apps that are on my television. I can say that I will not be using YouTube or anything like that. So my go-to is really much pay TV or SVOD. And we take, half an hour, a solid half an hour to decide what we're going to watch. So that is my day. I don't want to assume that everybody does the same, but a mix of that plus, my mobile phone being, my companion is essentially what my evening will look like.
Yeah, to be honest, it's much the same in my household when I get home with my partner. Um, we tend to get home, and we'll usually either have like a series that we've got into recently, which actually I think against the grain of what a lot of modern watching habits are maybe like. You don't really hear about binge watching as much now, but we definitely
True.
indulge in that. I mean, it's really dependent on, as you mentioned, the thing I find that's difficult is like content discovery.
Yeah.
So, and also decision fatigue is massive. It's still a
Yeah.
big thing I find anyway with us. And my default, interestingly, you mentioned casting. My default is if I can't find something on like a streaming service, or for instance, if I want to watch a particular thing, and then I search and I'm like, what streaming services is this on? If it's on one I don't even subscribe to already, my default is I'll go to YouTube and I'll just pay for it. I'll rent
Mm.
it for 24 hours or a week or however long it is, and then just cast it because it's the easiest. And I think that method of content discovery, at least for us, works the best, just because I think of the phone almost as like a multimedia remote for my
Yeah.
TV in a
Yeah.
sense.
Absolutely. No, I can relate to that challenge of finding content. It's kind of insane. I've done that a few times where, I have multiple SVOD subscription and I couldn't find anything, and I ended up, and I do that on Fridays quite a lot. Ended up buying it on demand or, download to own, which I thought this medium would die, right? Because essentially I thought I could get everything for, 10, 12.99 a month. So that shows that there's still, a lot of room for, the different business model in our space, because there's no way there's, one service or even a slew of services can actually answer our exact needs, across the board. I don't buy that. And I think that speaks to the need for content companies and streamers to very much have a 360 strategy and how they approach their business. We used to put everything on SVOD. In 2014 with Netflix, we thought SVOD is the way. There's no other way, right? You fast forward to today, and 10 years later, you have TV and fast, and so a linear experience coming back. Who would have thought?
It's interesting you mentioned about everything being on SVOD, because I remember when I had Netflix back when it came out, obviously piggybacking off of my sister's partner's account, which, was the norm. And I remember when I was a teenager, for example, I used to watch a lot of the time because as a teenager, you might not necessarily have your own TV. So I'd be watching like on a laptop
Yeah,
or a
true.
tablet. And I think that feeds in as well to like people talking about device fragmentation. I think for younger audiences, especially, there's still a lot to be said for being on those platforms. Because even though CTV is like seen as, it's the biggest screen in the house, it's the destination
Yeah.
viewing in the house, makes sense. But I think for younger audiences, if that's your target market, really those secondary screens still have a lot to be said for them,
Yeah.
because I think we kind of forget about the younger audience because they're not necessarily the ones reaching into their pockets, right?
Completely. So I have a mini experiment when I take babysitters to go out on Saturday nights. Every time I say, so guys, if you want to watch TV, there's Netflix and the likes, almost 9 out of 10 times, oh no, I'm okay. I have my mobile, I have my PC. Some will watch something, but most, will be on social media throughout the night. Those days I feel extremely old, but I think you're completely right. And that speaks to, again, aside from having a 360 strategy, in terms of business model, you need to have, an ubiquitous distribution and a device strategy that taps into that, right?
We've covered a lot of ground there already, but I'd like to actually expand on this and build a persona of the typical viewer by 2030 in Europe, which is actually quite is the very near future,
Yeah,
really.
6
And
years, not far.
yeah, exactly. Do you think the viewing experience will have actually changed much by then? Do you think we'll all be using the newest version of Apple Vision Pro when they inevitably release one that isn't $3,500?
Yeah.
Or will we all still be sat on the sofa watching TV at the end of the day?
So before we had a chat, I looked it up because I didn't know exactly how much, Apple Vision, was. Clearly, if it's at that level, but even a half that, yeah, I don't see that happening by 2030. I think this will remain something, high-end, and only, a handful of people use that. I actually see more of a use for this outside of the home, and so more of a B2B play than really a B2C play. But, again, that's my take. 6 years is not a long time. So I think essentially we'll keep, using the big screen as, where we spend, most of our time. We'll still have, those damn phones in our hands, nonstop. I think what will change is, who is still standing, within that ecosystem. And I think the broadcaster will be there, will have their part to play for sure. Then a handful of streamers, a mix of local and global. And of course, still so much more social media. I wonder if by then, YouTube hasn't simply taken over CTV, because today in the US, it's already, I think, 60% of consumption, happening there. And we all know that, Google is not, the very sharing type. And that means that the CTV platform, they actually need to mitigate the weight of YouTube within their ecosystem. They're carrying an app that is bringing, engagement hours, but no money, right? Or limited money. And so why, and we'll talk to that, why a lot of, the TV guys are building their own and operated, fast hubs, is that they want to have people watching linear content within their ecosystem. So I don't see any drastic change. I think we'll just trim down the number of players that we have with ourselves in our living rooms.
I think a lot of what's happened as well, you talk about some platforms still being standing in the future, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact that, personally, being, growing up in the UK, broadcasters, they have a certain part of sort of nostalgia in my mind as well, and like a certain comfort around them. They've built a brand that has spanned, in some cases, almost 100 years now, and they have that longevity that you can't imagine them not being there. So I think that plays into it a lot. Is like, for a lot of people, I think, I imagine around my age and maybe a bit older, it has that certain place in their viewing schedule where it's like their default as well. And I think that plays a big part in that.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Last week I was in London, and I interviewed Rhys McLachlan from ITV. And he mentioned this TV show, which apparently rallied, UK audiences, that is Mr. Bates versus the post office, and how it was a cultural event, something where, audiences flocked to hear about this story, a story that is very much, UK centric, etc., etc. So I believe that you'll be seeing similar successes in each of the markets. And I think that tells us what the job of the broadcasters is, right? It's a few years ago, they were the ones who brought us US content. They don't need to do that anymore. We have Netflix, we have Prime, there's Disney. And so they should refocus on bringing amazing local content. If they do that, then I'm not too worried about their survival. I will say that, of course, their core audiences are aging, but that's where, what the UK broadcasters are doing, or even, companies like TF1 launching TF1 Plus, making sure that there's something for everyone and that it's, as widely available as possible. That puts them, in the right spot, to stay relevant in our, day-to-day viewing experiences.
Yeah, and I mean, if they're engaging more on social media, as we mentioned as well, for younger audiences, if that's their aim to become a destination viewing spot in someone's schedule, then I think for younger audiences especially, social media is probably the way to go for them as well.
Yeah, I think it's BBC News who has, an incredible audiences on Instagram, right? So there's a way, right, for these guys to cater to those younger audiences. I think they just need to let go of the fact that it won't be the same numbers as before, but because we have so much more choice, right? So we could spend 4 or 5 hours a day watching TV when there was nothing else, right? 30 years ago, we had 5 channels in France. uh, our attention is being pulled, in many, many different ways. So get over it. You're not going to see the same numbers, but you need to keep that relationship to the audience. And what you were saying, my question is, someone who's 10, 15 years younger than you are, do they still have that relationship with the broadcaster? It's their job to do, but also as a parent, right? So my kids spend almost no time on YouTube. I almost make sure of that. So it's also us as parents making sure that we're transmitting this interest in those local brands.
And I think the next aspect would be what that 2030 viewer is actually watching. Do you think that shorter form content like YouTube shorts, reels, TikTok will actually be on those big screens in the living room as we're currently watching now, or do you think that it's going to be much the same?
I think there's space for, so the investment that YouTube is making on the big screen. You're seeing TikTok also developing apps for CTV. So clearly these guys, they're aging too. They want to be on the big screen, and there you will have a mix of short form and long form. The question is, what will the audience watch on on those screens? And I have no insight into what CTV viewers on YouTube are actually watching. Are they taking this opportunity to watch long form or short form? I don't know. I think there's space for both. We often hear that everyone's attention span is lowering, and I think that's true. At least that true attention span where you do just one thing. I think we do less of that. I see myself pulling up my phone when I watch TV. But we're saying that, because Gen Z are watching short form, they're incapable of watching long form. Success like, Wednesday on Netflix and things like that show that there's appetite for that. I think people are just blocking, different time within the day to do different things and to have different types. Someone who's watching only short form content, I'm a bit worried for them, to be honest. I think there's really room for both. I hope so.
No, I'm definitely on board with that. I'm a bit worried if someone just watches short form content just for their attention span alone, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine it's going to do anything good for them in the long term. And on the aspect of that, I think it comes down to the shorter form content poses more of an interactive element as well. And it's an instant gratification thing.
Yeah.
Do you think there's even really a demand for that type of viewing experience on big screens?
So I don't have any numbers, right? And I do like to talk with facts in mind, but I would say, why not, right? The only thing is that you need the quality to keep up. I think we've started seeing influencers or streamers, and by that I mean I'm thinking Twitch streamers, looking to make that move from social media and streaming to the bigger screen. A company like Jelly Smack, for example, it's a great example. I had chats with them, and I could see how they were, struggling to bring that format, onto the big screen. There's work to be done, but it's possible. If you're really taking what's on a mobile and put it on TV, yeah, I'm not sure, right? At least from a quality perspective. From a content perspective, why not? Would be my answer.
The experience you mentioned there about actually taking certain aspects of it and porting it over, I think makes sense, because from a discoverability point of view alone, right, when we've talked about that issue already, the biggest issue I find is that TV itself has gotten smarter. It's, there's so many features. You've got apps, you've got an operating system on there now, and it's connected to the internet. Great things. The TV remote is the same nearly exactly the same as it was 50, 60 years ago. It's still much the same functionality. You've got buttons. Some of them might have a keypad on there to make typing easier, but I got to say that's one of my biggest sort of problems with finding content and the experience of CTV is typing with the TV remote. Like, just that alone is just kills me. Like, if someone
Yeah.
hasn't set up their app so I can log in with my phone, I'm like, I'm probably not going to log in.
Actually, I read a very interesting piece yesterday about Sonos. A fellow analyst found the patent for Sonos TV. These guys want to get into the streaming TV game. Essentially, it looks pretty much like anything else, except for the way they want people to interact with the device. And it seemed that there's not going to be a remote, and everything is really going to happen here, right? And I agree with you. I think there's a lot of work to be done. Signing in, voice, speech, to look for something. There's a lot of work to be done. Cool. I think that's exciting, right? There's some more innovation that is needed. I would say it's just taking too long, in my opinion.
People are focusing, when I talk about people, I'm talking about myself and companies like I represent now. We tend to focus on the application side of things, and we
Yeah,
don't actually think about the interface. And really, when you think about CTV, the user interface comes from the remote, and that's the biggest limiting factor.
yeah,
So I don't know why there hasn't been more development into actually utilizing mobile devices for content discoverability. Like
yeah,
I mentioned, having a multimedia remote, I think that I see it anyway. I'd be very surprised if in 10 years I can't just browse the content on my phone and seamlessly have it on to my connected device without the annoying thing with like things like Now I find where they don't let you cast
yeah,
because they have the issue of like rights and things, and they have to have it on the CTV app as well. So then you have the issues of like you can't actually use AirPlay with certain things. So I think that's a big stumbling block that eventually, once that's solved and they can actually sort out like rights between devices and regions, then you're not going to have that barrier anymore. And I think more and more people are actually just going to be using their phones because we're on them 24/7 anyway. So it makes
yeah.
sense that we just go.
That's interesting. But the one thing I think, one of the reasons why it hasn't grown and developed that quickly is, you buy a TV and they want you to be immersed in that experience, and they're improving that, that UI UX every year. They want you to spend as much time as possible on there. So yes, it's not in their interest that you're looking for something and then, you turn off the TV. So it's their job to take you to content as quickly as possible. But the reason why they want you to do it with a remote is that they can make sure that they have your attention, when it matters, to showcase ads, right? So we had iSense TV announcing a partnership with Teads, and so on the home screen, top banner, you have a massive banner ads. If you don't navigate within the platform itself and you do that on a phone, that's their money right there that is going away. So unless they have the ability to build an experience on a mobile phone or whatever third-party device that could help that without losing you, then they will do it. But again, it's also about attention before you start watching something. And so, yeah, I'm not so sure the remote will be gone, that quickly, but let's see.
But it's interesting you mentioned about Hisense, because Hisense and Vestel, as we both are probably aware, the current news being that they're going to be the first platforms to get Freely. And that brings me
Yeah,
on to the subject of public service broadcasters, which for us, being in Europe, have a very special place in our lives and our lifestyles. I think because there's that public element, we feel like we're vested, right, in them. How do you see them adapting now to all of these changes that are going to be happening? How do they stay current in this market?
so I think Freely is a good example. I actually did a piece in my newsletter. Check it out, Streaming Made Easy. Shameless plug here. But about this new initiative by the UK broadcasters, essentially it's a platform, an app, I don't know what's the right word, where you will see all their live and on-demand content. And this platform will be made available, to anyone. And the focus is really to make sure that it's accessible to, broadband-only homes. So that means that, to that end, and it's on the web, it's on mobile, great. It needs to be on CTV, right? Hence those first partnership. I think this is a good example of broadcasters understanding that, habits are changing. It's, not good enough to only try to bring people, within your ecosystem. You need to be as widely distributed as possible. You need to take into account that, it doesn't matter how this gets to people, whether that's satellites or IP. And by combining their efforts, they're becoming incredibly strong, right? Those deals with the smart TV companies. I was at Roku a few years back, so I know how those goes. They're making sure that they're prominent. One of the reasons being, to go back to the remotes, that even though you say that remotes haven't changed that much, if you look at a Samsung remote, for example, there's like maybe 10 buttons and that's it. That means that you no longer have BBC One, TF1 when you press one. So I think that's one of the things where they're very worried about, being lost and giving away the prominence and all the engagement hours to the big guys, in the US.
Thinking about the TV remotes, yeah, I think the draft media bill that came out in the past year in the UK, that was one of the points of contention. Obviously, they were addressing those buttons on the remote, ensuring that the PSB's platforms have a prominent place on the remote. So obviously, like Freely is going to be taking the place of something like, for instance, we have like Freeview Play. That's, I think, going to be a driving factor as well, you mentioned, because it is simple. When you can't decide and you look at your remote, you go, oh, I'll just try this platform.
Yeah, I think I wrote a piece on TF1 Plus, and their CEO kind of downplayed the fact that they will have a button on the iSense TVs coming 2024. But actually, the power of this thing that we have in our hands, and you looking at those brands every day, it's massive, right? And it's a big shortcut to your service and to your content. So there's a lot going on, around that remote and the prominence. Again, you need to be there, and then a bit of regulation also helps. We like that here in Europe.
So, do you think now that fragmentation of those services and devices, do you think that has a role in how much consumers are now willing to shell out for their entertainment? And is it going to affect the consumer that much by 2030?
If you look back at a few years ago, and especially markets like the US, where you had to, spend over $100 to get access to content, right? So they went from this big bundle to let's cut the cord and get everything, on a one-to-one basis. What we see is that because there's so much going on, we end up spending just as much, almost just as much, right? And that's where we're going to see winners and losers. Some people are going to be seen as, a must-have, almost utility. And I think it's clear that, it is someone like Netflix or Prime. Prime, I would say not so much because Prime Video itself, but because it's part of the wider Amazon ecosystem. And then that's where, if you can't be one of these guys, then some people will just, fold. But that's why you're seeing ad-supported and fast, flocking into the markets, because then if you can't be this person I can pay $10, $15 for, then you got to be free, right? So I think we're seeing the limits of SVOD stacking, and we'll be seeing either people, reduce their spend or, go for discounted packages. And that's interesting because then we're coming back again to, and then people say it's the rebundling. Free, which is a French telco, announced last week a brand new set-top box. And for the first year, you got Netflix, Paramount, NBC, I can't remember which one else, maybe Disney, all of this at an incredible price. So that's how you can keep having that many subscriptions, but on a standalone basis, I don't think that's sustainable.
How the modern consumer is going to be watching by 2030, I think we're pretty much in agreement that it's not going to change a lot, but I think platforms are going to change an awful lot. And with, as you mentioned, things like YouTube being one of the biggest platforms on CTV, and now you see those other short form content providers moving there, it'll be interesting to see whether they gain prominence by then as well. and whether you'll have kids fighting over the TV remote because they want to press the TikTok button.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Completely agree. A different set of stakeholders, no major changes. 2050, I don't know, maybe no pay TV, no TV anymore. I don't know. Hard to say. Hope
yeah,
not. I love that
yeah, I'd
diversity.
hope not. Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing is we kind of forget that diversity is good for us. Competition
Yeah,
is good for us, right, as consumers, because
absolutely.
at the end of the day, that's how we get those introductory offers and those cheap packages. But I think longer term, especially for PSPs, it's really important that they build something that they can actually scale and start doing something about it now, especially when it comes to IP. Everyone TV, the ones behind Freely, for example, the collaboration between all the PSBs there in the UK, that company, they've released stats that they've gathered something like over 50% of consumers by like viewers in the UK will only have IP enabled connections for their TVs by 2030. And that's insane. Like,
That's
that's
insane.
why we're talking about 2030.
Yeah. Again, it's a stat, huh? And we tend to see very different things floating around. But they said that today it's at 50, it's at 15, right? And so there's no way they don't address, head on that portion of the UK consumers. And I believe that the UK is kind of, always at the forefront, whether we on, continental Europe like it or not, at the forefront of those changes, very much like the US. So I think it shows European broadcasters how they need to go about this, and some will go alone. Maybe some will, go the JV route. It will be interesting.
I'm going to ask you one final question, Marion, which I think ties in nicely to what you do at the local act, which is if, say, for instance, I was someone that was looking to enter the streaming market today, the European streaming market, that is, what would be, say, your top 3 tips that you'd give to someone?
So let's say you have experience in another market. Huh? There's a difference between starting from scratch and coming into a new region. If you have, existing business somewhere, you got to do your homework. There's no way around that, and you really need to learn a lot of, the presumptions that you have on a given market, like the European market. You need to unlearn what really worked in your home market, because what worked there may not work in the region. And I think that's one of the most difficult things to do, because it implies change, right? And it's hard. So that would be number one. Number two, of course, I would say, it ties in, but it's very difficult to operate a business when you're on the other side of the world. So, building muscles locally, whether that's, in-house or, getting outside help. And I think it's a shame that we're seeing so many layoffs and regional offices closing in different parts of the world, because I think that's the only way to really be successful in a market, is to have, ears and folks on the ground. And the last one is you really need to find your sweet spots. I think the days where you could look at what you have, your content, and be like, oh, I'm going to build this streaming service and I'm going to go D2C, no more. And I'm sure you have similar conversation when it comes to the technology piece, right? Do I have something to offer that no one else has? Yes or no? If the answer is no, then I would say forget it, or go at it a different route that is not direct to consumer, but maybe via partnership. I think it's interesting to see a company like Viaplay struggling right now. And so instead of keeping at it in D2C, they build branded corner where they are carried, within local and regional, distribution platforms. Sometimes it's just too hard. You don't have what it takes, whether that's the brand or the money, to go at this alone. So then partnership is the way to go.
So breaking it down then. So first we have do your homework, shake off your bias.
Yeah.
Don't carry in your learnings from other markets because it might not be applicable. Second of all, you mentioned the importance of localization, boots on the ground, so to speak. And I think that really ties in well because I did an earlier episode with one guest, Peter Dennehy, who's based in the MENA region. and he helped build 1 million subscribers for 2 different platforms. And he was talking about the importance in like that region, for example, of different culture, languages, just at a base level, because obviously Arabic, the UI needs to be completely different alone. And I think we don't have as much of the issues in terms of UI in Europe, but we definitely have the issue of localization. So understanding what cultures and customs are there, because Europe is a big place. We're all very different people. And, we have all our own traditions, our own upbringing, and that culture we grew up in. I think that's really important when it comes to the entertainment we consume. And last of all, you mentioned finding a USP, or if you can't find a USP, a partnership might be the way to go.
That's a good summary.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, it's all you, Marion.
No, but it's good. It's nice to hear it, from someone else. I'll include that in my next pitch.
Oh, perfect. Excellent. Oh, I'm glad I could help you out there.
Nice.
I think we're pretty much done there, Marion. I just want to thank you so much for your time today. You've been really insightful, and I hope listeners have found out a little bit about what they can expect the consumer to be like in Europe in the next 6 years. It would be great if some of these predictions and, these ideas we've had today do actually come true. We should maybe revisit it in 6 years.
Yeah, let's do that. Oh my God, I'll be 50 years old. Oh, I'm not sure I'm going to thank you with this thought for a Friday, but no, I love it. And guys, there's one thing, I love this region. I love how diverse it is. For outsiders, it's like it's killing them. It's like, wow, it's so complicated, so fragmented. I thrive in this complexity. I think that's fascinating. So hopefully, we'll have our European stakeholders, being successful in the region, finding success in the region. I'm rooting for them.
Yeah, me too. Just even from a consumer standpoint alone, because as we mentioned, competition is good for the consumer.
Absolutely.
If you're still listening, please don't forget to give us a rating and review in your podcast directory of choice. It means an awful lot for a growing podcast like ours. Make sure you subscribe to be alerted when the next episode of Beyond the Stream will drop. Until next time.